Naming alkynes can be a little tricky at first, but in this video, I'll show you how to decode organic names step by step using a few simple rules. By the end, you'll see that naming organic compounds is more like solving a puzzle than doing hard math. Let's turn confusing names into something you can actually understand. Welcome back to the channel where our goal at Tadashi Science is to make science simple. Make sure to subscribe so we can continue to help you on your science journey. Before we look at naming alkynes, we need to first know what an alkyne is. An alkyne is simply an organic molecule that contains at least one triple bond between carbon atoms in a molecule. Organic chemistry is based on carbon chemistry and deals with chemical structures built around a carbon backbone. The identifying feature of an alkyne is that you have one or more triple bonds present between carbon atoms in the structure. So here you see a few examples of alkynes. The one thing you should notice about all these molecules is that they are made of all carbons and hydrogens, and there are triple bonds present in the molecule. Now that you can recognize and identify alkynes, let's look at how to name them. When naming any organic compound, the first thing you need to do is identify the longest carbon chain. So when we name alkynes, we are going to count the longest carbon chain we can find. The longest carbon chain will not always be straight, and it will not always be counted from left to right. So it is important to pay attention to any bends in the molecule as we are looking for the longest continuous carbon chain. As we count each carbon, we will number them. The number we assign to each carbon will be important, and you will see that as we look at different examples a little bit later in this video. Once we count and label the longest carbon chain, we will then use a specific stem that is related to the number of carbons in the chain. Here's a list of the stems we would use if we had an organic molecule with a carbon chain that contained anywhere from 1 to 10 carbons. For 1, we would use meth, 2, we would use eth, and you can see all the way down to 10, we would use dec. These are the same stems that we use when naming alkanes or alkenes or any other organic structure, so it is a good idea to memorize them. The other important thing to know when naming alkynes is what suffix should be added to the ending of the stem. There will be a lot of different suffixes to keep track of, but when we name alkynes, it is pretty easy. We will use the suffix -ine or yne. So the stem correlates to the number of carbons in the carbon chain, while the suffix corresponds to the organic class the molecule is a part of. And in the purpose of this video, we are looking only at alkynes, so we will be using the suffix yne. So now that you know how to identify alkynes and the correct stem and suffix to use when naming them, let's look at some examples. So in our first example, we will look at a molecule that has 2 carbons and a triple bond in the middle. The stem that we are going to use is eth because eth corresponds to having 2 carbons in our structure. Because we have a triple bond in the structure, we will use the suffix -ine or yne. So the name of this molecule would be ethyne. In our next example, we'll look at this structure here. It is important to first number our carbons to find our longest continuous carbon chain. In this structure, we're going to number our carbons from left to right. It is important to note that when we number our carbons for alkynes, we want to start numbering our carbon on the carbon that is closest to the triple bond. So that is why we would number these carbons from left to right. When I number the carbons, I can see that I have 4 carbons. And the stem that we are going to use for 4 is bute. Because it's an alkyne, and I see the triple bond, I can add the suffix yne. However, there are multiple places that this triple bond could be in our structure, so we need to include the number of the carbon on which the triple bond starts. Because my triple bond starts on carbon number 1, I'm going to add a 1 in between bute and ine. So the name of this molecule would be bute-1-ine. In our last example, we'll look at a structure that contains not only a triple bond, but also another functional group. So when I start off looking at my structure, I want to number the carbons to find the longest continuous carbon chain. And I want to make sure to remember to start numbering my carbons at the carbon closest to the triple bond. So number the carbons in this molecule, I will not number from left to right, but rather from right to left. So I'll number my carbons starting here on the far right carbon. This is because this is the carbon that is closest to the triple bond. When I number my carbons, I see that my longest continuous carbon chain has 5 carbons. This gives me the stem pent. Because I have a triple bond present, I know I'm going to add the suffix yne. However, you need to remember that we need to account for which carbon the triple bond starts on. And this triple bond starts on the second carbon, so I'm going to add 2 in between pent and yne. The last thing we need to account for is this other functional group here, known as a methyl group. When we add this methyl group in, we will add it as a prefix or add it to the beginning of the name. We need to account for the name of this functional group, which is methyl, but also the number of carbon that it is bonded to, in this case 4. So I would add 4-methyl in front of pent. This gives me a name for this molecule of 4-methyl pent-2-yne. Now you know how to name alkynes. If you found this video helpful, here's another video to check out. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel as we produce more content to make science simple.